Hello all, my name is Mark Mead. Today we're going to be talking about urban forestry in the conservation district world and the interaction. And as part of this, we're going to be talking with, now the clicker doesn't work, different word. We're going to have three speakers today. Ben from the Department of Natural Resources, Ben Thompson. He's been with their program for some time, very skilled and knowledgeable about the interaction between the work that DNR has in the community. We're going to be talking with Ellen Einstein. She's with the King Conservation District, and she's going to be talking about their programs in terms of urban forest health program. And then we're going to be speaking with Brandy Reed, and she's going to be introducing a brand new handbook that's out there. What's really important about that handbook is, and she'll talk about this, it's in the sense of what we can do with it. And just to get you all up to speed on terms of urban forestry in the context, one of the first things I was going to ask is how many of the 281 registered towns and cities in the region, in the state, how many of those are Tree Cities USA through the Arbor Day Foundation? Any guesses, percentage-wise? All of them, half of them, 30, 50%, 30%. Okay, that's quite a bit actually. And you'll notice here, if you look up on the screen, you'll see a number of these places where they're actually these smaller towns have been tree cities for some time. So urban forestry is here and people are doing it. And it's not just in the large cities where we're that we work with in King County or over in Spokane and the like, but it's also smaller towns throughout. So with that, I'd like to introduce Ben Thompson. He's an urban and community forestry grants program he's going to be talking about. And I'll let Ben start it. Ben's going to be talking to us via Zoom. And just to let you know, Ben is actually back east, and we really appreciate him giving us some of his time today. And this will, and take it away, Ben.
All right, Mark, do I have the capacity to share my screen here?
Yes, you're getting it.
Okay.
Yes, you should be able to.
Super duper. Oh, you know what though? I was having some audio issues before I joined the meeting. That's why I kind of showed up right at the last minute, but I've since closed the PowerPoint presentation. So just give me a second. I got to go reopen it. But while I'll see if I can multitask. I'm not that great at it, but I see if I can talk and navigate to my presentation at the same time. Thanks, Mark, for the introduction. I do want to point out that yes, in fact, a lot of the communities that we work with are small communities because when it comes to urban and community forestry, the largest cities in Washington or some of the cities that have been working at this a while, they've already made decisions to dedicate resources to it. So in some cases, the larger cities, Spokane, Tacoma, Seattle, of course, Vancouver, like they have more resources and staffing than our program does. And so we are able to provide a lot of resources to the smaller communities that either haven't made, a specific decision to be investing in their trees, but we can, there's a lot we can provide to someone that's starting from zero, essentially. And so most of the cities in Okanagan County, for example, are Tree City USA communities. I think there's all but two maybe in Okanagan County are Tree Cities. So there's a lot of cities in rural Spokane County as well that are participating. So I did find my presentation now. And oops, let me see. Okay, can everyone see that? All right, so I started with a pun because I like wordplay. I hope no one's taken this before, but wading into urban and community forestry, because I think it's something that there's a lot of opportunity for with conservation districts, but there's a handful that we've done some work with, and I'll profile those. But other than that, I think there is a lot of opportunity. So why is my slide not advancing? There we go. So our program, we've been around since 1990, and we do three primary things. We provide educational, technical, and financial assistance. So educational is, training classes. We provide publications, access to other resources and tools, guides, kind of like how-to type things for folks that are interested in managing their trees. We also provide technical assistance, which is quite literally just coming out to the community, looking at a specific issue, maybe looking at specific trees, maybe talking about policy issues, whether it's tree ordinances or management plans or managing tree risk. We can come out and provide kind of like some boots on the ground, like here's what we suggest, or here's what we recommend. In some ways, I kind of like to think about our program as very low-level consultants. We're not going to provide, a full report or a big write-up or producing charts and tables for you necessarily, but we can come and help you understand the challenge that you're dealing with, or how to just think about the problem differently. So that way, if you decide that you do need more assistance and you do need to invest in a consultant, we've essentially primed you to be asking the right questions. We also provide financial assistance, and that's through our grant program. And also for our Tree City communities, we provide a $500 reimbursement for the trees and materials to celebrate Arbor Day. But that's just available to the Tree City communities. This year, we put out our largest pool of grants ever. We got some new funding from the state of Washington last legislative session in 2021. So we received $2.68 million in state funding. Before that, we had only been operating with about $400,000 a year of Forest Service funding that has supported 2 full-time staff and a modest grant program of about $100,000. In this latest grant cycle, though, we are awarding $550,000. I'm in the process right now of working with our successful grantees, and we hope to get those projects up and running by July 1st if we can. In fact, one of those grantees I'm going to talk about here in just a moment. This is our team. That's me, myself, the program manager. I've been with the agency in the urban forestry program, urban and community forestry program, for about 12 years now. I've been the program manager since 2020. Moving across the screen, we have Daria Gastela. She is our projects and outreach specialist. So she works closely with our grantees. She also works on some other projects that have been funded through the Forest Service, which you'll hear from me about. And then she does all of our communications work, our newsletter and that type of thing. Jess Lloyd is our urban forestry specialist. She's leading that technical assistance I described for communities out in the field. Jeremy Porter is a state lands forester in Northwestern region, the DNR's Northwestern region, which covers the 5 kind of Northwestern counties in that part of the state. And he provides urban forestry technical assistance at about 30% of his time. So if you're in Whatcom or Skagit or Island or San Juan conservation districts, or Snohomish for that matter, Jeremy's your person. And then we have Garth Davis, who is a contractor with us. Garth is the forester for the Spokane Conservation District, and I'll talk about them next. We've had a long-standing relationship with the Spokane Conservation District because our program historically has always been based in Olympia. So it's a long drive to Spokane. So if someone needs technical assistance, it is a lot easier for us to dispatch Garth out to those communities. And Garth, if you know Garth, or if you are in Spokane County or nearby, you know what a valuable asset he is. He's very, very knowledgeable about forestry issues, very knowledgeable about our program and urban and community forestry issues as well. So he really has a real well-rounded and robust body of knowledge to provide great assistance to the cities out there. And certainly that relationship has been very effective. It's been very productive. It's been mutually beneficial because through our contract, we offset the cost of his staff time for that conservation district. We had a similar relationship for a short time with Cascadia Conservation District. What happened there, we had a person that we were funding under a contract for technical assistance for about a year between, I think it was roughly 2018 and 2019, or 2019 and 2020, I can't recall. But then she later left her position, and the district felt like they didn't have the right person necessarily, or the capacity in-house to continue that agreement. But we're certainly open to continuing that in the future if things change at the conservation district. We also previously funded them. They were one of our past grantees, and they applied for tree canopy analysis in partnership with the city of Chelan, Washington. But the conservation district was the primary applicant who saw through like all the administration and financials of that particular grant. Underwood Conservation District in Skamania and Qlikitak County is one of our newest grantees that we're really excited to work with. Tova Tillinghast, for those of you that know her from Underwood Conservation District, put together a very compelling grant proposal centered around Tree of Heaven and spotted lanternfly awareness. So for those of you unfamiliar, spotted lanternfly is an invasive insect that is not yet in Washington. It is in other states back east where I am currently. I don't know if it's actually in Vermont where I am right now, but by the way, everyone's house looks like this in Vermont, just in case you didn't know. This is my parents' house, but nonetheless, Tree of Heaven is an invasive tree. It is the primary food source for spotted lanternfly. And so there is a lot of invasive Tree of Heaven in the Columbia Gorge area. And this is a big issue because the spotted lanternfly also feeds on a lot of agricultural crops, grapes, hops, fruit trees, what have you. So it could be very devastating to Washington if this arrives. And so we're going to be doing some pre-planning in the gorge by identifying where those Tree of Heaven are and making a plan to get rid of them, as much of them as we can, and replace them with more appropriate trees. This also dovetails with a project that was funded with the Forest Service that we're doing called the Pest Readiness Project. And I dropped the link in there, and I can make sure that Mark and other conference organizers can get you this copy of this presentation or something after the fact. But the Pest Readiness Project is just a project that we have ongoing to try to raise awareness amongst Washington communities about how to be better prepared for what we know will eventually be an invasive pest outbreak somewhere in Washington. But if we can get to it quickly, our chances at eradication are good if we get things on the front end, and that's why we want people to be ready. The King Conservation District, we received in partnership with them a $300,000 grant from the USDA Forest Service. They've produced 2 manuals here. I'm going to not talk about these because that's what Brandy's here for. But it's a wonderful project. It was a great relationship, a great partnership with King Conservation District to execute this. Snohomish Conservation District, long story short, King Conservation District didn't quite spend out everything that we had available. We set up a separate agreement with the Snohomish Conservation District to provide a little bit more outreach, and I'm sure Brandy will talk about that as well. But so far, so good. We're wrapping up that project with Snohomish Conservation District and happy to be working with them. I know that there are other conservation districts, like Pierce Conservation District is doing work with the city of Tacoma. They're doing projects to say, like, take out existing hardscape, like asphalt that's not necessary, and then replace it with pervious cover, with mulch, with plants, with soil, what have you. I know Mark Mead has done some work with the Mason Conservation District with the city of Shelton to work on some green infrastructure work there as well. And there's probably other conservation districts out there that are doing urban forestry or green infrastructure work. My hat's off to you. We just haven't maybe directly partnered with each other yet. So, and that's the case with Pierce and Mason. We haven't done a direct partnership with them, but we're just aware that they are doing something out there, some work. So with that, I'm going to yield the rest of the time to the other speakers, but I'm happy to hang around, and maybe perhaps we'll do questions at the end. So thanks so much for inviting me to the conference, and I'm happy to be here.
Thank you, Ben. That was great. Well, and one of the things that you should know is that program is solely funded in the urban forestry program for getting money to that grant money out. So one of the things that they're ready to do, and I think Ben did talk about, is that there's money on the table coming up next year. Is that correct? And so getting together for that funding sources, you got to get ahead of the curve.
Yeah, so with our grants next year, we don't know exactly what those will look like. So of the 550,000 that we awarded this year, 450,000 of that amount was one-time funding. But the urban forestry is, so I've been told, is relatively popular in the state legislature right now. That's partly why we were successful in getting funding from them in the last legislative session. So it's possible that either the DNR or another legislator of their own volition will put forward some kind of additional urban forestry legislation. It's also, we know that we are getting more funding from the USDA Forest Service. Congress is allocating more funding for urban and community forestry through several of the new bills that have been passed, including the infrastructure bill. So we just don't know exactly what that's going to look like, or how much it is, or what it's going to be for, because the Forest Service, as our grant partner, as our funder, they get to make some decisions about how we spend this and how much we get. And those conversations internally within the Forest Service have not been finalized yet. So we're just kind of on hold a little bit, just waiting to find out what we're actually going to get. So once I have a better picture of what our financial situation looks like, 12 months, well, even less than now, because we would be advertising our grants in the fall or in the late end of the year, I should say end of the year. We'll probably advertise them in December. They'll be due in March. And then we'll hope to get those projects awarded by July 1st. So that's the general timeline for those grants and kind of where we're at with them.
Ben. So, okay, Brandy Reed is our next speaker, and Brandy's going to be talking about that program that Ben mentioned. And one of the things that's really cool about this is, I'll just let you know real quick, I did some work very similar to what this toolbook was all about just before it came out, and I was kind of kicking myself that I wished I would have had this toolkit help me out with that program. So it's very invaluable project. And so how do we go about designating? There you are, Brandy. Howdy, Brandy.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Okay. Am I ready to go?
Yes.
Okay.
Good
Good morning, everybody. Happy to be here. Brandy Reed with the Whatcom Conservation District. And I'm here today to talk to you about the Trees and Stormwater project that Ben briefly mentioned in his presentation. And I'm going to share my screen to tee up my slideshow for you, my PowerPoint. Just give me a second to get going here. Okay. I hope this works. I had a little bit of a problem the last time I was presenting on this. Okay. I'm having a trouble getting my slideshow to start, you guys. Hold on just a second. I'm going to stop sharing for a minute. I'm apparently, I have a dual monitors and I'm having a challenge with my monitors. I don't know why. Okay, I can't get the right monitor to present. Okay, give me a sec here. One more time. I'm gonna not be able to look at you and look at my PowerPoint at the same time because of the way my monitors are working. So I apologize for that. Actually, maybe I can move my monitor, move my camera. Can you guys still see me?
Yep.
Okay. All right. So, all right. Thanks for that. Little bit of a digression. You can see just the PowerPoint, right? Not the actual slide deck in my editing view. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay.
That is correct.
Okay. Thank you. All right. So, so the Puget Sound Urban Tree Canopy and Stormwater Management Project has its genesis in the Puget Sound Conservation District's caucus collaboration around regionalizing programs and services. So for those of you that aren't in Puget Sound country, the 12 CDs around Puget Sound have been collaborating to organizing for collective impact at an administrative level and at a programmatic level. And this particular project comes from the work that we've been doing together to regionalize base programs and services around the Puget Sound. So forest stewardship and urban forest management are part of that portfolio of regional programs and services that we've been collaborating around. And we've been working closely with the Puget Sound Partnership through the action agenda process to tee up this work as well as working with other regional partners like Washington DNR Urban and Community Forestry and Ben Shop. And in 2015, we received both funding through, well, we started the process of accessing USDA Forest Service landscape scale restoration program funding through Washington DNR, as well as National Estuary Program program funding through the Puget Sound Partnership and the strategic initiative leads. And the culmination of all of that work is this Puget Sound Urban Tree Canopy and Stormwater Management Project. And there's a couple of things that I want you to understand about this, which is that that the goal of this project is to bring the conservation districts together in this space of forest management and urban forest management and stormwater management. And it is, it's also intended to be help the region achieve some of the goals and objectives that we have around recovery of Puget Sound. So trees and stormwater is something that we know a lot about, and you know, we understand how tree canopy and stormwater runoff are directly related, and how pre-development conditions, there's a balance in the hydrological cycle when tree canopy is in place that that helps us manage stormwater and manage water for quality as well as quantity. And when we have situations where a lot of canopy has been removed in the post-development context, we know that we get the hydrological cycle starts to get out of balance in terms of massive amounts of, you know, spikes in stormwater runoff. There's a lot of literature, a lot of documentation on this. The urban forestry community, the stormwater communities, you know, doing good work in this area and have been for a long time. What we were hoping to do, and what we are still hoping to do with this project, is bring those two communities together in a closer collaboration to work together to achieve co-benefits from our respective areas of work, and achieve some measurable, you know, on the ground outcomes that we're looking for, namely improved canopy health and cover and improved stormwater runoff mitigation. So the tree and stormwater project now then got going in 2015, and phase one of the project had two objectives: to develop a technical report and to develop a handbook. And I'm going to talk a little bit about those two pieces with you here in a little more detail. And I'm going to do it through the lens of the handbook. So the handbook is actually a communications piece about this whole project. And the technical report, the top left document here, the document on the left here, is where all of the underlying analysis has been interpreted. And I'm going to go into both of these, but I'm going to talk about the analysis and how it's treated in sequence in the handbook. So the handbook has 4 sections. The first section is an overview of the multiple benefits of urban trees. And this section of the handbook is covering, well, anyway, sorry, I'm going to stop for a second. I was going down a rabbit hole. I'm going to stop and just continue with my summary here. The second section of the handbook is a summary level treatment of the work that is represented in the technical report. And the third section is a highlight of how we can collaborate together, the urban forestry, stormwater communities, decision makers, landowners and businesses, how we can all collaborate together to get the co-benefits out of these 2 areas of work. And then the fourth section is a compendium of resources that are cited in the handbook, as well as resources that we think are valuable for people to have access to that we didn't directly reference within the handbook. So I'm going to start with rolling through each of these sections. And I just want to say that section 1 is all about the full range of the benefits of trees and tree canopy. So I started this conversation with you here today talking about trees and stormwater and the hydrological cycle, and that's heavily treated in this section of the handbook, as are other elements of the benefits of urban trees and forests around air quality, carbon sequestration, human health and well-being, etc. So you'll find each, it's only you'll find treatment of every single one of these elements of benefits, and then there's a lot of resources that are cited that'll take you out of the handbook and into other places where you can dive deeper into these topics. The second section of the handbook is where the model analysis has been summarized, and I'm just going to touch on that really high level here, and I'm happy to talk with anybody in more detail about the underlying analysis in this project. What we did was we started with 4 pilot communities, and we were testing or comparing and contrasting 2 hydrology models, one used by the urban forestry community called iTree Hydro, the other one used by the stormwater community called Western Washington Hydrology Model. We analyzed, we compared and contrasted the 2 models at 4 spatial scales within each of the 4 pilot communities, and ran each of those spatial scale analyses with 3 scenarios. There were 71 model iterations in this underlying this technical report, and the findings that we have summarized in the handbook and treated in a little more detail in the technical report are listed here. And I'm not going to go into these in detail right now because I don't have enough time. Happy to talk with people about that in more detail, but just at a high level, what I want to say is that the way that this section of the handbook is structured is that it lays out how the research was done. It talks about the key findings, and it talks about the takeaway messages that you should be getting from these key findings. And so to highlight just a little bit for you, one key finding is that canopy cover, when it's replaced, no matter what kind of cover type, land cover type you're dealing with, you're always going to see, both of these models are showing that you're going to see an increased runoff volume, an increase in runoff volume. So it doesn't matter if you have trees over grass or a full forest or shrubs, you take away that kind of canopy and you get a spike in stormwater runoff. And so the recommendation here out of this work is that you would plant and retain trees whenever and wherever you can in order to help mitigate stormwater runoff. Another example of a key finding is that tree cover overhanging impervious area results in decreases stormwater runoff volumes. And so the recommendation there is to plant and retain trees that are overhanging impervious surfaces wherever possible. And another key finding was that it's important to retain trees during development because when compared with post-development runoff scenarios, pre-development and post-development runoff scenarios, you get a much better stormwater runoff benefit from retaining mature trees than you do with taking those trees away and replacing them with small trees. It's intuitive, but it's nice to see that both of the models are saying the same thing and saying this point, which is an important point, that we need to keep trees during development and not just sort of nuke a site and then come in and put trees in at a mitigation ratio of 4:1 or 12:1 and think we've done good stuff. Section 3 of the handbook focuses on collaboration. So this is where we really wanted to go with this project, which is to bring together all of the players to talk about how we can get the co-benefits out of urban forestry work and stormwater work. So this chapter section is focused not only on urban forestry and stormwater professionals, but also decision makers and residents and landowners and businesses. This is all about collaboration in this section. It's talking about all the different community priorities that can be addressed through collaboration, and then the co-design and co-benefits that the co-benefits that you get from co-designing projects. And then it highlights 3 case studies. I'm going to touch on the 3 case studies very briefly here. First case study is from Inglewood, California, and it's called the Lennox Community Greening Plan. This is an example of a diversity, equity, and inclusion project that was an urban forestry project that was reforesting street trees, and the focus was human health and equity. And we'll be featuring these case studies that are highlighted in the handbook in a phase 2 of this project. I'm going to get to it in a minute, but we're calling it the toolkit. So that's what that little note at the bottom means. And I'm going to talk about the toolkit in a minute, not a minute, a few minutes. So we looked for recently, as part of phase 2 of this project, we've been looking for local examples of the case studies that were highlighted in the handbook. I should mention that we didn't highlight local case studies in the handbook because we couldn't find write-ups of local case studies. So we have case studies from around the country in the handbook. And now what we're doing is looking for examples of local case studies that illustrate the same sort of type of project that's highlighted in the handbook. And in the case of the Inglewood, California Lennox Community Greening Plan, the corollary in the Puget Sound Basin that we've identified so far is Tacoma's Community Tree Mapping Project. We'll have information about both of these projects in more detail available to everyone in the not too distant future, beyond what's treated in the handbook. The second case study in the handbook is from Portsmouth, New Hampshire, and it's a tree filter project that is a highly engineered approach to integrating and maintaining healthy urban trees in street tree environments for longevity and overall co-benefits. And so a corollary in the Puget Sound region is Renton's Stormwater Green Connections program, which will be highlighted in phase 2 of our project. And another case study that's highlighted in the handbook is this Lennox, Kansas Range Recreation Program, which is a very similar to the Stormwater Gardens or Stormwater Parks initiative here in the Puget Sound area, and a similar type of project in our area is Arlington's Stormwater Treatment Wetland. All of these case studies and local examples will be developed in more detail and shared out in more detail through phase 2 of the project. Before I pivot to phase 2, I just want to say that you can get technical report and handbook, printed copies of the technical report and handbook from either Katie, Amrine and Dang, or Ellen Arnstein. The technical report is housed at King CD. The boxes are there. The boxes of the handbook are at Snohomish CD. So, and I think that there was an intent to bring some of the handbook with to the event today. It may be there for those of you to pick up. I'm not sure. If it isn't, you can contact these people to get printed copies. PDFs are available on the Conservation District's, Puget Sound Conservation District's betterground.org website. You can also get to those PDFs through the unique URL treesandstormwater.org. And I also just would like to call your attention to a recording of a webinar that was done about a month and a half ago on YouTube that goes into more detail about the content that I've talked about here today. So, and these are the funding partners from the first phase of the project. And we have since pivoted to what we're calling phase 2 of the project. And we've repurposed phase 2 to be larger than trees and stormwater. And we're calling it Forests for Community Resilience. At this time, that's our working title. It may change. But the idea is that we are building out a web-based toolkit of all these resources that we think are important for people to have access to in order to support and promote the collaboration between the professional sectors and the community that we've been wanting to promote since the beginning of this project. And so while our feet are in the trees and stormwater kind of arena, we are going back to our deeper roots of being in the regionalized programs and services of the Puget Sound Conservation Districts in the area of forest health management and urban forestry. And we're now pivoting to this online tool to try to aggregate to basically function as a compendium of all the resources that we think are really important for everybody to have access to, ready access to. So this graphic that is on the screen is meant to represent visually how this toolkit is going to work. And so the idea is that the tree, the top half of the graphic where the tree is highlighting all of the important benefits of tree canopy, that all of the important natural resource management priorities that everyone is telling us is important to them: climate resiliency, stormwater management, habitat restoration and management, etc. And the idea is that the trees we're getting to these things through trees. And so the top half of the graphic is meant to represent the place that we want to go with trees around climate resiliency, air quality, carbon sequestration, etc. The lower half of the graphic is is displaying the content that's going to be in the toolkit. So we're going to try to connect all these dots through all this content. And so we're going to have assessment content, and analysis contents, policy and planning content, content that's going to support collaboration, etc. And so this toolkit is in design at this time. This is the second phase of this larger project, and we anticipate being able to roll out the toolkit this fall. And so for those of you that are in conservation district, in the conservation district community, through the work of the CDs that have been participating in this project and the Puget Sound Conservation District's caucus, will be pushing out to the CD community this toolkit, as well as pushing out the toolkit to the larger regional community, because it's not just for CDs, but I just want you to know that because you are associated with CDs that are leading this project, you're going to get an inside track to being notified when this is available.
Hey, Brandy,
and for use. Yes.
We're going to move on.
Okay.
I'm going to go ahead and if you can
Yep.
give us 30 seconds.
Yep, I'm all done actually. So
Okay, great.
Yeah, thank you for your, I just wanted to make the plug that the whole point of this project is to promote the retention and expansion of tree and forest canopy cover. And hopefully you'll find these tools useful in helping you take on that charge within the urban and peri-urban spaces, and even apply it to the rural spaces, because it is applicable. And these are the funding partners for phase 2 of the project, which is in process. And it sounds like maybe I don't have time for questions, but if we do, I'm available to answer any questions here or offline. And with that, I will stop sharing my screen.
Thank you, Brandy. Thank you very much. Just to let you all know, Brandy was the founder for the Puget Sound Caucus program that we talked about earlier, forestry program, and it's been a big godsend to forestry efforts in the conservation district world in the Puget Sound region. Our next speaker is Ellen Einstein, and had the pleasure to work with her through the Puget Sound Caucus program, but also she's does a little side gig, which is actually her real gig, in urban forestry with King Conservation District.
Good morning. I'd also like to thank Brandy. She built the urban forestry program at King Conservation District that I have just fallen into. But I wanted to take a little step back and think about what exactly is urban forestry, and kind of poll the audience, like how many of you think that what you're doing could be considered urban forestry? One. So maybe a little discussion on like what you might want to consider if you're thinking of branching out into urban forestry, if it's, something to look at. So this is a photo that I use pretty frequently. It's of the Woodmont Beach Community Club from an aerial photo in 1936. So you all know this, the land use of Western Washington has gone through a couple of phases. So we had a couple of rounds of logging, a transition to farming. There was, at least in King County, some mining efforts. And now the current threat to these more or less contiguous forests is development, urbanization. So as you have and more buildings, more and more houses, roads being built. This is the context that we are working within, not only in the urban areas, but also rural areas. And King County is, probably it is the most urbanized county in Washington state. But we look at this context for all of our forest stewardship programs. So we have the bulk of our work is actually rural forestry. But when I say rural forestry, we're still working with properties that have between 1 and 5 acres. And that is one, because King County has a lot of services. So King County and DNR and WSU, and this is like a niche that we could fill. But also these are properties where landowners are like, do I really bother keeping my 4 acres of forested backyard? And we're there to be like, yes, think of your little forest as part of this larger forested whole. I mentioned Brandy put together our urban forestry project. It is rates and charges funded. So it might not be an easy model to replicate for many people. And we work with 34 of we have 34 member jurisdictions of the 38 cities or 39 cities in King County. And urban forestry is called out as part of our interlocal agreement with the county as a specific program. And as part of that program, we do have funding. I have $150,000 of project management support. So it's not like a grant program. We work with cities to come up with a project, and then that project is managed either by a contractor that King CD hires or in-house by our crews. Or in one memorable example, the forestry team took a field day to Grace Cole Park and injected laurel trees all day, and we did the work ourselves. So, and then staff time is rates and charges funded. So, however, when you're thinking about the work that you do and how it could transition to an urban forestry program, a lot of the things that we do are the things that we would do for our forest health management. So working with our landowners, in this case, individual cities, to think through what are their goals? What conditions do they have in their forests? What are their management options and how would they want to implement it? So it's the same. So as an example of that, we did a project with the city of Seattle in the, I hope not aptly named, Dead Horse Canyon, which was, so there's Lake Ridge Park, and then obviously it's bordered on all sides by neighborhoods. And they wanted these neighbors to become good stewards of their backyard forests that kind of bleed into the park. So we funded backyard forest stewardship projects on 3 private properties. And that's because the outreach was kind of difficult. And we put together an education plan, backyard stewardship guide, and did actually hands-on work with these neighbors and volunteers to kind of expand the Seattle city's management a little further outside of their borders. And this is something that we've moved into another city. We've used this model now in Maculaire Creek, which is a long creek, and there are about 13 landowners involved, and we learned our lesson, but maybe it's not as the community participated in the management planning and the surveys that we did, but the actual implementation will be with the contractor. And so we can compare, the results of the projects and also the buy-in and how much influence the people who live around that area think they're having. So that's an example. That's an example of looking at where your forest program could expand into a city. The other way of doing it is looking at where a city is like, these are my needs, how can you help? So just meeting a city where they are. And we use Snoqualmie as an example. They're sort of the gold standard. Their city arborist is also, he was the president of the Pacific Northwest ISA. So they have an in. But working with KCD, they put together a forest management and stewardship plan for their properties. And you can see that just a conditions assessment, a pretty rapid assessment that they did with Forterra. And then they realized that they might not have urban forestry funding for this. So they worked with KCD again to do an assessment of what are the benefits that urban trees provide in terms of stormwater. And they quantified that and then presented that to their city council. And so now they can use stormwater rates to pay for their urban forest projects. And so this last step that fingers crossed we'll work with them on this year they've been doing some implementation of their forest stewardship plan. And then KCD will be supporting like a 60-acre section of doing forest implementation. So they have taken the step from, the plan to the funding to the implementation, all with KCD support. And that's meeting them where they are, which is kind of advanced. A lot of cities, they don't even know what they have. They might not have a city arborist. They might not have stormwater staff. They're not really sure. So Ben Thompson had mentioned that DNR helps fund cities to do a tree canopy assessment or an inventory. We went rogue, and Brandy and Elizabeth Walker managed this tree canopy assessment with our vendors Planet Geo. And not only does it have an interactive map interface, but it also provided reports to the cities. And this is mostly useful to city council. City council is like, well, how much tree canopy coverage do we have? Are our tree ordinances working? Are our development rules working? What's the change over time? There has to, if you're a tree manager, if you're the arborist, if you're, a forest staff, you have to actually go into these areas and see, is this actually plantable area? Are there underground utilities? What's going on? So the top map is just tree canopy coverage, with the darker color being more canopy. And then you can also plan for your future. And so I made it look, we wanted to prioritize where there are BIPOC populations and underserved, and that's a economic salary range, I think, census data. And so if we wanted to concentrate on those neighborhoods meeting a specific equity need, we would look at the red neighborhoods. But you could look at stormwater needs. If the city council has a certain priority. You could look at wildlife connectivity. So any of those things with this canopy matter. Some of the other things we're working on, as I mentioned, we've been doing some forest management plans and implementation, Lake Forest Park, Mackler Creek I mentioned, and Grace Cole Park, that was our field trip. The city of Burien is looking to expand their volunteer stewardship program and also set up a volunteer stipend program. I think a lot of people want to volunteer or get into green jobs, but you have to pay for a bus to get there. You have to pay for childcare. You have to take time off. So we are trying to incentivize largely high school students and early college students by providing a stipend. Tukwila, and I think they stole this idea from Pierce Conservation District, is interested in looking into the city forest credits. So looking at what kind of urban forest projects could they get funding for by putting them on the carbon market. And so actually those two, we used the urban forest project money to hire a staff person who would run those two projects, which is not something we've done before. And fingers crossed it goes well. We'll see what happens. And then kind of your basic things, tree inventory. We've done tree giveaways in Seattle. We're planning some in Kenmore, Kirkland. Take a road trip out, get a tree, plant it in a neighborhood that probably doesn't need it as much as others. But we're really excited about all of these, the range of projects that cities are asking for, and that hopefully we can support. I didn't mention this, we usually aim for about 3 cities per year So three projects per year. And we'd like to have the project completed within about 3 years. So at any one time, we've got, a couple years projects going at once. This, I don't know if this would ever be applicable to you all in case, Sound Transit decides to expand vastly across the entire state. But we are working with the City of Shoreline and Sound Transit to do mitigation work for the light rail extension. They put up a sound wall and took easements from quite a few houses. And in those houses, we are now providing free trees and consultation so that they could have a sound barrier as well as, sucking up carbon and providing habitat for birds and wildlife. And in that photo, Marin, our special projects coordinator, is just talking up specific species of trees. So we did consultations in every backyard and was like, here's your conditions, here's what we can plant. And we've worked with 32 properties so far with 51 trees and 277 shrubs. The goal is actually to work at 250 properties. So the City of Shoreline expanded to 2,700 properties that we get to knock on their doors. Would you like a free tree? So, this is not to say that we don't have challenges or issues as well. A lot of the work in the cities, obviously the forests are where you can't build. So those are a lot of ravines and steep slope areas. And so thinking through what are the guidelines to work there? When do we need to bring in an engineer? When do we need to use core logs or riprap or whatever? Because we're working in 34 cities, the permits, that's fun. So thinking if we could get permit exemptions with a forest plan in an urban area. And then also we have the opposite. We have like individual landowners that have larger tracts of land, but they're in incorporated King County, so that doesn't fit in our model of work. So how can we work there? Expanding, our outreach to address limited English proficiency communities. How do we evaluate the work that we've done? All that jazz. That's inside baseball. I'm sure you're fascinated. And then this next bit it's pretty much what Ben presented. I went a little further afield. So again, Pierce Conservation District has their urban tree giveaway and their city forest credits program. So we're not the only ones doing urban forestry. Talked about Spokane. And I went a little further. Campbell County, Kentucky has a tree planting enhancement grants that they give away. Sherburne, Minnesota has individual urban tree planting that they're doing tree planting and care and also stewarding afterwards. Tualatin Soil and Water in Oregon is doing apartment conservation. So they're going super urban here, where you could have container gardens for carbon sequestration, or talking about bird baths and things like that. And similarly, Riverside Corona Resource Conservation District in California. So there's a wide range of ways that you could get involved, either using your regular programming in an urban area, or thinking about what are the other programs that we could build, or what are the needs of the cities in our areas. And I say cities, but urban is just incorporated, or, where there are more landscape trees, like street trees or sidewalks, or not huge. You don't have to have skyscrapers or anything. That does not the city make. Questions, concerns for Brandy or Ben or me? No. We went late.
Well,
Sweet. Thanks all.
So just to let you go, before you go, is Ellen asked a really good question what the urban forest is. I used to use the definition as the urban forest starts at the last logging road and ends at the mayor's front steps is the urban forest, because that is, I mean, you look at the context up and down, and so that's where we work, conservation district work. We work across that landscape. The other issue is that a lot of the things that we talked today are about, or seem to be urban Puget Sound centric. They're not. That toolkit that Brandy was talking about is applicable. A lot of that is applicable out the door. One of the reasons that I wanted to bring that toolkit to you, the Stormwater toolkit, as Ellen pointed out, it's an incredibly important tool. There's so much involved in stormwater management that the conservation district can get engaged in, not just the urban forestry component. There's the outreach component. A lot of smaller towns can't afford the outreach side of it. Conservation district can step in. There's a whole bunch of other things that are engaged in that. And then in terms of, and as Ben pointed out, smaller cities is where the Tree City USA, if you think about it, a single tree in Osuyus has a lot more impact than a single tree in the city of Seattle, just because of the heat island and just the idea. And I was down in Fort Collins, Colorado, a town built on the idea of planting trees in a desert to attract people out of the desert to that city. So urban forestry is a huge component of what we do in the conservation district world. If it isn't, it's something we could get into. Any other questions? Stuff? The toolkit is going to be available. I would strongly recommend you look at it. A lot of the stuff that's in it is available and will work in any community. Again, thank you both, all three of the speakers. I hope you're all still there. Guys, Randy and Ben, thanks for your time. And once again, thank you all for being here.